3 weeks was how long Sarah had stood at the edge of the great hall in Veldrath Keep, neither welcomed inside nor permitted to leave, wearing a wedding dress that had been white when they first put her in it, and was now gray with fireplace ash and the slow erosion of her own dignity. 3 weeks since Aldrich Vane, alpha of the Thornwall Pack, had pressed his signet ring into hot wax and signed her name over to the Lycan King like a deed to a piece of land he no longer wanted. The document had been read aloud at the bonding ceremony, in front of 400 witnesses. She had heard her own name spoken in that dry, administrative voice, as though she were livestock to be transferred, not a woman who had spent the previous night pressing flowers into the seams of her veil. She had not screamed. She had stood at the altar with her hands folded and her chin level, and she had listened to every word, and she had not screamed. Bond between her and Aldrich had snapped like a green branch, fast, loud, final, and what replaced it was not grief. What replaced it was something much colder and much more patient than grief. The Lycan King's name was Calder Ashvale. He was not present at the signing. He had sent his second, a tall woman named Brix with iron-gray hair and the posture of a drawbridge, who accepted the document without reading it and left without acknowledging Sarah directly. Sarah had been escorted to Veldrath Keep by 4 of Calder's border soldiers and deposited in the Great Hall like a parcel that had arrived outside business hours. No one had told the king she was there, or if they had, he had chosen not to acknowledge it, so she stood. Days moved around her. She did not understand at first why she refused to leave. The doors were not locked. No one physically barred her exit. She could have walked out into the mountain air, into the gray Ashvale Highlands, into whatever came next. Something held her to that stone floor. Not obedience, not fear, but a specific articulated fury that needed a witness. What had been done to her had been done publicly, with an audience of 400. And she would not quietly disappear into the wilderness and let the transaction complete itself without a reckoning. She would wait for the king. On the 22nd day, the 22nd morning of cold porridge, brought to her by a servant who looked slightly apologetic about the whole situation, and Calder Ashvale walked through the doors of his own great hall and stopped. He was taller than she had expected. She had been given a description. Warrior build, dark, the age of a man who had governed wolves through 3 territorial wars. And the description was accurate enough, but missed something essential about the stillness. He stood in the doorway in travel clothes, still carrying road dust on his shoulders, and he looked at her with eyes the color of slate after rain, and she looked back. He had a sword at his hip. He had not drawn it. She had been standing in the same gray dress for 22 days, and she met his gaze without flinching. The great hall of Veldrath Keep was long and stone-floored with high-arched ceilings, and 2 fireplaces on the north wall that the servants kept fed through all hours. In the 3 weeks Sarah had inhabited it, she had learned its acoustics intimately. The way sound gathered in the east corner near the tapestry of the first Ashvale hunt. The way a whisper at one fireplace could be heard as a murmur at the other, if you angled your head correctly. She had spent those 3 weeks studying the hall the way she had once studied tactical maps. Methodically, without sentiment. She was the daughter of a borderland steward. She had grown up understanding that knowledge of your location was the primary form of safety available to people without armies. Calder crossed the hall. His footsteps were slow and even on the stone, and she watched each one, and did not move. Stopped 6 feet from her. "You're still here," he said. "I am," she said. He studied her face, not with the assessing look of a man appraising purchased property, which she had prepared for, but with something more complex, a searching quality, as though he were trying to find the seam of something, trying to understand how the pieces fit. Been looked at many ways in the previous 3 weeks. This was a new way. "I was told you'd been placed in the guest chambers," he said. "My steward sent 3 notes. Your steward sent 2, she said. The first was a request I treat the hall as a waiting room and accept accommodation. The second was a slightly firmer version of the same request. I declined both, not receive a third." Something shifted in his jaw. It was not anger. She wasn't sure what it was. "You've been sleeping in the hall," he said. It was not a question. "Bench near the east fireplace is adequate," she said. "Your staff left a blanket after the first night. Been kind." A long pause. The fire in the north hearth crackled and settled. "Why?" he said. She let the question sit in the air between them for a moment before she answered. She had thought about how she would answer this question for 22 days. She had revised her answer many times. In the end, She had decided that the simplest version was also the most honest. And honesty was the only currency she had left that hadn't been spent by someone else. Because what was done to me was done in front of witnesses, she said. I will not make it easy for that to be forgotten by stepping quietly aside. Another pause. Longer this time. She watched his hand. It rested near the pommel of the sword but did not touch it. She had spent a great deal of time in the past 3 weeks thinking about that sword. She had been told in the vague threat-coded language that Aldrich's emissaries preferred, that the Lycan King did not accept unwanted deliveries and was known to return them decisively. This had been meant to frighten her. It had not succeeded in frightening her in the way intended. But it had made her think carefully about what to say when she finally stood in front of him. She had decided not to beg. She had decided not to perform gratitude for whatever mercies he chose to extend. She had decided to simply tell him what was true and let him make of it what he would, because she had spent the last several years performing the emotions that Aldrich required of her, and she had no performance left in her body. What is your name? Calder said. She said, Sarah Bren, daughter of Thomas Bren, border steward of the Lowmark, not Sarah Vane. I never took that name, she said. Bonding was signed over before the ceremony completed. Technically, I remain Sarah Bren. He considered this. Aldrich Vane sent you here. He transferred the document of betrothal to your second, she said. Whether you that sending depends on whether you consider yourself to have agreed to receive me. Based on the evidence of the past 3 weeks, I would say you did not. He was quiet again. She was beginning to understand that his silences were not uncertainty. They were processing, the way a deep river looks still from the surface. You understand what this means, he said. Being here, what you're asking. I'm not asking anything, she said. I want to be precise about that. I am not asking for your protection, your charity, or your attention. Standing in a specific place in order to make a specific point, which is that I was transferred like property, and I refuse to behave as though that transaction was legitimate, which means I refuse to complete it by disappearing, and I also refuse to complete it by accepting it. I am standing here because this is the only arena in which the transaction happened, and I will stand here until it is formally undone. The sword. He had not drawn it. His eyes had not left hers. How old are you? He said. 26. And you've been standing in my hall for 3 weeks, 22 days. She watched something move across his face. It was brief and she couldn't name it precisely, but it was not contempt. She had braced for contempt. This was something else. He turned away from her then, and she allowed herself a single slow breath, the first uncalculated breath she had taken since he walked in. He walked to the north fireplace and stood in front of it with his back to her. And she watched the set of his shoulders reading the language of a body that was clearly accustomed to having decisions made alone. Bricks, he said. His second appeared from a doorway Sarah hadn't noticed before. A narrow servant's access behind the second tapestry. The iron-haired woman moved into the room with the efficiency of someone who had been listening. She needs a proper room, Calder said. Not the guest wing, the south tower. Clothes that aren't that. Brix's eyes went to Sarah. Her expression was professionally neutral. Yes, my lord. Sarah looked at Calder's back. He had not turned around. I haven't agreed to anything, Sarah said. No, he said. You haven't. He left through the main doors. That. She listened to his footsteps fade across the outer corridor, and she stood very still in the gray dress in the gray hall, and she thought about what had just happened and what it meant, and whether the careful, patient thing she had been building over 22 days had just found its footing, or whether the ground was about to shift in a way she couldn't predict. She looked at Brix. The south tower, she said. Yes, said. It's warmer than the hall. That's a low bar, Sarah said. Edges of Brix's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Sarah followed her out of the hall. The south tower was indeed warmer. It was also higher up than she expected, reached by a spiral staircase that opened onto a round room, with 3 east-facing windows that looked out over the Ashvale Highlands. Mile after mile of gray-green mountain slopes, patches of dark pine, and the white thread of a river she couldn't yet name. There was a proper bed. There was a hearth with a fire already laid. There was a bathing room through an inner door, and Sarah stood in the doorway of it and looked at the copper tub and felt something in her chest loosen that she hadn't known was locked. She bathed for a long time. One of the keep's servants, a young woman named Elodie who could not have been more than 19, appeared with clean water and clean clothes. A practical gray wool dress, boots that fit, a heavy wool wrap. Bah. Elodie had the particular social expertise of people who understand that some kindnesses are best delivered without conversation, and she dressed Sarah's hair and said almost nothing, which was the correct instinct. When Elodie left, Sarah stood at the east windows and looked out at the highlands and let herself feel, for the first time in 22 days, the actual dimensions of what had been done to her. She and Aldrich had been promised to each other for 4 years. She had been brought into the Thornwall pack at 22 as a political alliance, the borderland girl from the Lowmark, whose father's stewardship controlled the 3 passes into the eastern valleys. Aldrich had been 28, not unkind in the early years, attentive in the way that a man who needs a strategic asset is attentive, understood the nature of the arrangement. She was practical. She had accepted it. Somewhere in the 4 years of it, she had made the mistake of believing the arrangement had become something more. Not love, exactly, not the blood-deep mate bond that pack wolves described in their songs, but a partnership, a shared household, a mutual comprehension of each other's strengths and limits. She managed to keep Eastern negotiations for 2 of those 4 years. She had learned the pack's treaty language. She had sat beside him at 3 council meetings and been the one, twice, to find the phrase that ended the deadlock. Then the territorial dispute with the Ashfield claim had escalated, and something in the calculus had changed, and she had found out about the transfer not from Aldrich, but from his steward, who had come to her with the document in hand and a face full of the particular agony of a person delivering news they did not choose to carry. The transfer had been legal under pack law. The betrothal document had reserved the right to reassignment in cases of territorial renegotiation. Not read that clause carefully when she signed it at 22. She had been 22. She had trusted him. That was the part that sat in her chest like a coal. Not the transfer itself, but the specific mechanism of it. He had not argued with her, not told her, not given her time to respond. He had used the legal language of the contract she had signed in good faith and deployed it like a weapon, while she was arranging the flowers for her own wedding. The flowers had been larkspur. She had chosen them because larkspur means dignity in the old floral language of the borderlands, and she had thought that was a fitting thing to carry into a bonding ceremony. She had left them on the altar when Brix's soldiers arrived to escort her north. She thought about those flowers often, and when she thought about them, she made herself feel the feeling all the way through rather than smoothing it over. Because smoothing feelings over was the habit that had kept her from reading the reassignment clause 4 years ago, and she had decided to stop doing it. On the 3rd day in the South Tower, Caldecott Ashfield came to speak with her. He knocked, which she had not expected. She had expected him to enter, or to summon her to his study, or possibly both. The knock was a recalibration. She opened the door. He was in working clothes today, dark wool, no sword, though she suspected it was nearby. He looked like a man who conducted his thinking by walking, and who had perhaps been doing that this morning. "May I come in?" he said. "It's your tower," she said. "Not what I asked." She stepped back from the door and let him in. He stood by the window and looked out at the highlands for a moment. She sat in the chair by the fire and waited. She had become good at waiting. "I read Aldrich's contract," he said. "The original betrothal, the reassignment clause," she said. "Yes, it was legal," she said. "I know it was legal." "Legal doesn't mean correct," he said. She looked at him carefully. "No, it doesn't." He turned from the window. "Brix told me what you said, in the hall, not asking for anything." "I meant it." "I know you meant it," he said. "That's why I'm here." A pause. The fire popped. "I need to understand something," he said. "Aldrich transferred you as part of the Greyvale Accord, in exchange for border rights in the eastern passes, which your father controls." "Yes," she said. Understood that was the logic. "Did your father consent to this?" She had not expected that question. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I haven't been able to reach him. Aldrich's people managed my correspondence for the last month before the transfer. I was aware of it at the time, thought it was routine preparation." Something crossed Calder's face, a tightening around the eyes. Aldrich told my counsel that you were given to me as a gesture of goodwill," he said. "The transfer was agreed on all sides." "I was not asked," she said. "Cannot speak to what my father was or wasn't told." "If your father did not consent," Calder said slowly, "then the Greyvale Accord is built on a false premise. Eastern passes cannot be guaranteed by an agreement that the steward of those passes didn't actually make." The room was very quiet. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not triumph, but recognition. This was what she had been waiting for. Sympathy, not rescue. The moment when the transaction's own logic unraveled. Pass rights run through my father's bloodline, she said. Not through me and not through Aldrich. Transferring me secures nothing geographically. Accord would have been worthless from the beginning. Calder sat down across from her. Was also unexpected. The king sitting across from her in a plain chair. As though they were two people having a conversation that mattered. Aldrich knew this, Calder said. It was not a question. Aldrich is not a stupid man, Sarah said. What he is a man who has a great deal of legal machinery at his disposal and a gift for deploying it in ways that look cleaner on paper than they are in practice. He sold you a premise. The mechanism he used to deliver it was me. Why? Calder said. Because I became inconvenient, she said. I believe, though I have no proof and would not claim it as fact, that there is another woman, someone whose family offers him something politically that he values more than the Eastern passes, now that the territorial pressure has eased. Transferring me via the Greyvale Accord accomplished two things simultaneously. It gave you the appearance of a diplomatic gift, and it removed me from Thornwall without requiring Aldrich to explain himself to his pack. Calder was very still. He used a territorial accord to dispose of a personal situation, he said. Yes, she said. He used me to seal a treaty that cannot actually be sealed by me, which means you signed an accord that may be legally sound but is strategically hollow. He looked at her for a long time. You have been thinking about this for 22 days, he said. I have had time to think about very little else, she said. Waiting in your hall was not comfortable, but it was informative. Something happened in his face, then that was not quite a smile and not quite admiration, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Do you want? He said specifically. Not what you don't want. What do you want? She had thought about this too, revised it many times, the same way she had revised her answer to why she was standing in the hall. She had arrived at something that felt honest and precise. I want the transfer declared void, she said, on emotional grounds, on contractual grounds, the false premise of the accord. I want it on record, with witnesses, that the transaction was illegitimate. I want to contact my father to confirm what he was or wasn't told, because if Aldrich misrepresented the terms to him, then that is a much larger problem than one woman in a gray dress standing in a hall. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then, he said, after it's on record. She held his gaze. I haven't decided that yet. He nodded. A single, slow nod. Then he stood and walked to the door, and she watched him. And he paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at her. My steward will arrange a courier to the Lowmark, he said. To your father. Tonight. He left. Sat by the fire, and let the warmth of it reach all the way through her, and she breathed slowly, and she thought about Larkspur. The courier reached the Lowmark in 4 days. The response came back in 9. Sarah was in the keep's library when Brix brought her the letter, which was the first library she had been permitted access to freely, and which had already become something close to essential to her. A room full of Highland territorial histories and pack law documents, and, incongruously, a large collection of botanical maps, which she had been reading with unironic pleasure. Brix laid the letter on the table beside her without ceremony, and Sarah turned it over and looked at her father's seal, which was cracked. Broken in transit, which could mean many things, and she had to remind herself not to read omens into damaged wax. She opened it. Her father's handwriting was the careful handwriting of a man who had spent 40 years drafting official documents, precise and slightly sideways, as though his words were always about to walk out the right-hand margin. She knew this handwriting the way she knew the sound of her own heartbeat. He had not consented to the transfer. He had been told, by Aldrich's legal representative, that the accord was a ceremonial acknowledgement of the existing relationship between the Thornwall pack and the Borderland stewardship, that Sarah's presence at Veldrath as a goodwill envoy would strengthen trade ties. He had been told she would be there for a season and return. He had not been shown the betrothal transfer document. He had not been told about the Greyvale Accord by its actual name. He had been lied to. The letter shook slightly in her hands, because she was surprised. She had suspected this, had mapped the probability of it carefully over 9 days. But because suspecting a thing and having it confirmed in your father's careful sideways handwriting were different experiences with different weights. Then, she set the letter down on the botanical map of the Northern Highland river systems. She pressed her back into the library chair and looked at the ceiling and breathed, and the breath was long and deliberate, and in it she felt something complete, the last piece of the architecture she had been building since the morning she stood at the altar and heard Her own name read as a line item. She had not been discarded, she had been used, which was worse and also, in its own strange way, clearer. Discarded things are, at least honestly, valueless to the person who discards them. Used things are seen as resources, which meant Aldrich had calculated her worth and decided to spend it, and had spent her on something that served him, and only him, without asking, without warning, with the casual totality of a man who had never quite stopped thinking of her as the border steward's useful daughter, rather than a person with a name she had chosen to keep. She folded the letter carefully. She put it in the inside pocket of her wool dress next to her ribs. She went to find Calder. He was not difficult to find, as it turned out. He had a habit of being in motion. She had learned this over the 13 days she had been in the keep, in the South Tower, watching the rhythms of the place. He walked the walls in the early morning. He worked in his study from mid-morning through the afternoon, had his meals when they came to him, rather than at set times, which his kitchen staff appeared to find either endearing or maddening, depending on the day. In the evenings he walked again, sometimes into the courtyard, sometimes farther, into the rocky ground just beyond the keep's outer wall, where the highland grass was low and silver in the late light. She found him in the courtyard. He was doing something with a length of rope and a wooden post that she could not immediately interpret. And he stopped when she came through the inner door, and he read her face. "Came," he said. "Yes," she said. She told him what the letter said. All of it, including the part about the ceremonial envoy, the trade ties, the lie about her return. She told it plainly, without editorial commentary, because the facts were sufficiently damning on their own. And she had learned long ago that the most powerful testimony was the unadorned kind. When she finished, the courtyard was very quiet. Highland wind came over the wall, and moved her hair and moved nothing else. Calder was looking at the rope in his hands. "He told your father you'd be back in a season," he said. "But the transfer was permanent." "Yes." "He lied to both of you simultaneously," he said, "for the same accord." "It appears so," she said. She watched the rope in his hands. His knuckles were white. "The Greyville Accord has to be dissolved," he said. "I know, that means approaching Aldrich's counsel formally, bringing the case for misrepresentation on both sides. It will be a public proceeding." "I know," she said. He looked up at her. "He'll try to discredit you. He'll say you misunderstood the terms. You're making claims out of—" He stopped. "Out of bitterness," she said. "Yes, you will say that." "Will it affect you?" he said. Kindly, not unkindly. Practically, in the way of a man who needs accurate information for tactical purposes. She considered it. "I am already a woman who was transferred as a diplomatic parcel and stood in a foreign king's hall for 22 days in a grey dress," she said. "My reputation has already absorbed significant structural damage. Think I can survive being called bitter." The rope in his hands went slack. "I'll call the council," he said. "All of them. Thornwall delegates, Asheville elders, and I'll ask your father to send a formal representative if he's able." "He won't come himself," she said. "He's not well. He hasn't been well for 2 years. But he'll send his first advisor. A woman named Marsh, who has been with him for 15 years and has a memory like a legal archive." "Good," he said, paused. "Sarah," it was the first time he had used her name. She looked at him. "I want you to understand something," he said. "When the accord is dissolved, when the transfer is voided, you will not be obligated to remain here. I am not renegotiating the terms of the transaction. I am not offering you a different version of the same arrangement." She waited. "What I am offering," he said carefully, "is the capacity to determine your own next step. Where you go, what you choose, what name you continue to use, that is yours, not mine to direct." She felt the words land, and she let them land without deflecting them. Been waiting for the hidden condition, the renegotiated clause, the moment when the kindness revealed itself as contingency. It had not appeared. She did not know what to do with its absence. "Why?" she said. It was the same question he had asked her in the hall. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I have had enough of people in this region being moved around the board without their consent," he said. "And because you have spent 22 days refusing to behave as though you were a piece to be moved, and I find I am not interested in proving you wrong." She stood in the courtyard with the Highland wind in her hair, and she said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say, and he seemed to understand that. And he went back to his rope and his post, and she stood there a while longer in the late afternoon light, and breathed the cold, clear air, and let herself feel that, too. Council convening took 11 days to arrange. In those 11 days, Sarah did not stop moving. She was in the library every morning, pulling Highland Pact law documents and cross-referencing the language of the Greyvale Accord against treaty precedents from the previous 30 years. She accessed to Calder's legal archive, which Brix had facilitated without being asked. Another recalibration. Another small evidence of something she was carefully not yet naming. She found 3 prior cases in which betrothal transfers had been voided on grounds of misrepresented accord premises. 2 of them were obscure and would require careful presentation. Third was a landmark case from 14 years ago, the Farron annulment, which the Highland Pacts still cited in contract disputes, and its language fit her situation with an almost eerie precision. She also, in those 11 days, began to understand Veldrath Keep and its rhythms in a different way than she had understood them from the Great Hall or the South Tower. She ate in the kitchen with the staff twice, which Elodie appeared to find simultaneously charming and alarming. She walked the walls in the early morning and discovered that Calder was already there, and they walked a portion of the wall together on 3 occasions without planning to, and on those occasions they talked about the Eastern Passes, about Highland Pact politics, about the botany of the Highland river systems, and whether the botanical maps in the library were accurate about the northern distribution of lowland grasses. They talked the way people talk when they are not performing anything, when they are simply 2 minds that find each other's company useful. She did not know what to call this. She was not going to name it yet. She had learned the consequences of naming things too early. But she noticed it. She was paying attention. On the 9th day, Aldrich's envoy arrived. He was not Aldrich himself. She had not expected Aldrich himself, who would have known better than to attend a proceeding he couldn't control. But a man named Holt, who was Aldrich's chief legal representative, and who had been present at the original betrothal documents signing and at the transfer. He was a careful, gray-faced man with small eyes, and the kind of professional pleasantness that functioned as a wall. He arrived in the great hall. Calder was present with Brix and 2 of his elders. Sarah was also present, which Holt clearly had not anticipated. She saw it in the fractional pause before his professional pleasantness reasserted itself. "My Lord Ashvale," Holt said, "we understand you've raised questions about the Greyvale Accord." "Concerns," Calder said. "Bring your delegation tomorrow. We'll discuss it formally." Holt looked at Sarah with the specific look of a man who is cataloging a problem. She met his gaze without expression. That evening, Elodie brought Sarah a note slipped under her tower door. It was from one of the kitchen's staff, a man who had connections to the Thornwall Pact's outer household, the kind of connection that accumulates in border regions, where family histories cross pack lines. He wrote that Holt had been in the keep's outer courtyard, speaking with 2 of his traveling companions about the likelihood that the Ashville King had been, as he put it, unduly influenced by the woman's presence. Unduly influenced. She sat with the note by the fire and felt the coal in her chest again, that patient cold thing. She wrote back a single line, "Thank you for this. I won't forget it." The council convened the next morning in the keep's main hall, which had been arranged for formal deliberation with a long table, and the carved chairs that Sarah recognized from Calder's library floor plan sketches as the ceremonial elder seats. People sat at the table, Calder and Brix and 2 Ashvale elders on one side, Holt and 2 Thornwall delegates on the other. Thomas Bren's advisor, the woman Marsh, had arrived the previous evening and sat at the table's end, a small white-haired woman with the bearing of a glacier and a leather document satchel on her lap. Sarah sat beside Marsh. Holt spent the first portion of the proceeding attempting to establish that the Greyvale Accord had been transparently negotiated and that the betrothal transfer had been conducted with all parties' full understanding. Done this many times and who believed the room belonged to whoever controlled the language. Then Calder said, "Marsh, please read the correspondence you received from Aldrich Vane's office in the month before the transfer." Holt's pleasant expression did not change, but something behind it did. Marsh opened her satchel. She read for 23 minutes. She read every letter from Aldrich's legal office to the Lomark stewardship in the 8 weeks preceding the transfer. She read them in the order they had arrived. She had everyone. She read slowly and clearly, and without inflection, and the cumulative effect of them was that of watching a structure reveal itself to have been built on a substrate that was not what it appeared to be. When she finished, the hall was quiet. Steward of the Lomark was told his daughter would serve as a seasonal envoy, Calder said, a goodwill gesture between 2 allied pacts. He was not told about a permanent betrothal transfer. He was not shown the Greyvale Accord document. did not consent to a transaction that claimed his cooperation as its premise. Holt said, "The Accord's language does not require the Lowmark steward's explicit consent. The betrothal document signed by the lady herself was signed when she was 22 years old and did not have independent legal representation," Sarah said. All eyes went to her, including Holt's. "The reassignment clause in that document was not explained to me at signing," she said. "I was told it was standard PAC betrothal language. I did not have access to PAC law records to verify that independently. No, a clause of that type was not in fact standard." With respect, Holt said ignorance of. "I am also," she said, "in possession of a clause from the Farron annulment of 14 years ago, which established that a betrothal document containing a clause not explicitly explained to and understood by both parties at signing may be challenged on grounds of inadequate disclosure. I have pulled the original text." She laid it on the table. "The language is almost exact." Holt looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time. "The Farron case involved a minor," he said finally. "Farron case involved a person without independent legal representation," she said. "I was 22, but I was a borderland steward's daughter in a foreign PAC's legal proceeding. The principle holds." The Asheville elders were reading the document she had placed on the table. Holt said nothing more. Spoke next. And when he spoke, his voice had the quality of a settlement being reached, a final stone being placed. "The Greyvale Accord," he said, "was premised on a consent that was not given and a cooperation that was not agreed to. It was negotiated using a document whose terms were not disclosed to the signing party. These are not procedural irregularities. They are the foundation of the accord itself. Them there is no accord." He looked at Holt. "I am dissolving the Greyvale Accord," he said. "Effective today. The betrothal transfer is voided. Claim." The Thornwall PAC believed it held over the eastern passes through this accord is similarly without standing. "Your counsel will be notified in writing by the end of this week." One of the Thornwall delegates said, "Lord Asheville, you may bring a counter-challenge through the regional PAC tribunal," Calder said. "I will welcome that proceeding. I have a great deal of documentation." The delegate closed his mouth. Holt looked at Sarah. She looked back at him. "Aldrich," she said. That the Larkspur was a better choice than he knew. She did not explain it. She did not need to. Holt left with his delegation within the hour. Marsh stayed to share a meal with Sarah and Brix in the keep's secondary dining room, a warmer, smaller room than the great hall, with a window that faced east and filled with afternoon light. Ate a soup made from Highland turnip and winter herbs, and Marsh ate with the methodical satisfaction of a woman who had just done excellent work, and Sarah watched her with a deep, specific gratitude that she felt down to her back teeth. "Your father will be glad," Marsh said. "He'll be furious," Sarah said. "About what Aldrich did." "Yes," Marsh said, and then glad. Brix poured more soup into Marsh's bowl without being asked, which Sarah took as a significant gesture of respect. After Marsh retired to her guest room, Sarah sat alone at the table for a while. The afternoon light moved across the stone floor. Fire in the east hearth was the good kind. Not the desperate heat of the great hall's 22-day vigil, but the comfortable warmth of a place that has been tended. "That," Calder appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, and she looked up at him and he said, "The Farron annulment. How did you find it?" "The library," she said. "There are several hundred volumes in that library." "I had 11 days," she said. He came in and sat at the table and looked at the east window for a long moment. "I should tell you something," he said. She waited. "When my second brought me the transfer document, the Greyvale Accord, I refused it," he said. "Brix refused it on my behalf before she left Thornwall. Aldrich's office sent a revised version 2 weeks later with a clause making the transfer unilateral under territorial law. There was nothing Brix could do to block it without triggering a PAC war." Sarah sat with this. "So you didn't choose to receive me?" "No," he said, "but I also didn't." He stopped. Started again. "I was told you had agreed. That you had signed everything willingly. No reason to disbelieve it, and every reason not to escalate. Sent the note saying you should take the guest chambers because I thought." He paused. "Thought giving you comfort and a quiet way to complete the arrangement was a courtesy." "You thought I was here voluntarily," she said. "I thought you were here voluntarily," he said. "And then you came home from a trip and found a woman in a gray dress who had been sleeping on your hall bench for 22 days and refused to move." "Yes," he said. A pause. "I am sorry for the 3 weeks. You were away," she said. "Could have come back sooner," he said. "I knew someone was waiting. I delayed." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" He looked at his hands. They were large hands, the hands of a man who had used them for work and for fighting and for, she thought, quite a lot of careful construction. Because I didn't know what to say, he said. When I came home and found you, I didn't know how to do that conversation. I was afraid I would do it badly and make it worse. She considered this. You did delay it badly, she said. 3 weeks is a long time to be uncertain. Yes, he said. You should have come back sooner, she said. Yes, he said again. She looked at him. I accept the apology, she said. Not because I am satisfied with the explanation, but because I think the explanation is an honest one, and I have learned to tell the difference. The afternoon light had gone golden low. Outside the east window, the highland slopes were darkening from gray-green to the deep blue that came before dusk, and the river she still hadn't named was a thread of fading light across the landscape. Need to decide what to do next, she said. You told me that was mine. It is, he said. I could go to the Lowmark, she said. My father isn't well. There's work there. There is, he said carefully. Could also, she said, consider whether there is work here worth doing. Silence. The eastern passes, she said. The accord is dissolved, but the actual geographic reality hasn't changed. Thornwall Pack still borders the Lowmark. The Ashfield Highlands still need stable eastern access for trade. The misrepresented terms were never the real problem. The real problem is that no one has actually negotiated a legitimate, transparent agreement between the 3 parties with all relevant signatories present and all clauses explained. He was very still. She said, Is a negotiation that someone should... Yes, he said. Someone who knows the Borderland Treaty language and the Lowmark Stewardship's interests and the Ashfield Pack's actual territorial needs, and who is not at this point meaningfully aligned with Aldrich Vane. Yes, he said again. I'm not saying I want to stay, she said. I'm saying there is a reason to stay that is mine. I have identified, and that serves interests I care about, including my father's. That would not be... She chose the word carefully. It would not be a continuation of anything that was done to me. It would be a beginning of something I chose. Calder Eshvale, who governed wolves through 3 territorial wars and had a sword he had never drawn in her presence, and a stillness that ran deep as river water, looked at her across the table in the last afternoon light. Does he stay, on those terms? Exactly those terms. For as long as it takes to negotiate the agreement properly, she said, after which I retain the right to go wherever I choose. After which you retain the right to go wherever you choose, he said. He nodded. The fire in the east hearth settled into a comfortable, even burn. She was not thinking about Larkspur now. She was thinking about the botanical maps in the library, and the Highland River she hadn't named, and whether it was fordable in winter, and whether the botanical record showed any significant variation in lowland grass distribution below the northern tree line. And all of these things were practical things, oriented things, things that pointed in a direction. Brix appeared in the doorway, looked at the 2 of them, and said, There's bread, in a tone of studied neutrality, and both of them laughed, which was also a first. The first laugh she had experienced in Veldrath Keep, that was not private and internal, and it felt surprising and clean. She ate bread in the warm room. She slept in the south tower with the east windows full of Highland dark. She did not think about Aldrich. In the weeks that followed, the south tower room changed, not in its furniture, which remained the same practical arrangement of bed and hearth and chair, but in its texture, in the way it held the morning light and the evening cold, and the particular smell of Highland stone that was different from the flat stone of the Lowmark, that had more weather in it, more altitude. She was making it hers, she realized, without deciding to. The way you make a place yours. By learning its corners. By having opinions about where the blanket should fold. By knowing which stair creaks on the ascent and which on the descent. She was in the library with a territorial map spread across the oak table when Calder appeared one morning with a secondary map and a question about the second of the 3 eastern passes, and they stood side by side at the table and traced routes with their fingers. And she noticed that his hand and her hand were close on the map's surface, and that neither of them moved away, and that this was information of a specific kind. She did not act on it, neither did he. They worked instead, for 4 more days, building the framework of an agreement that was transparent and bilateral, and covered every clause in plain language, every term defined, every right of refusal noted. On the 5th day, when they had the framework complete and had sent it to Marsh at the Lowmark and were waiting for her father's review, Calder came to the tower with a piece of paper and knocked on her door. She opened it. He stood in the corridor. There is a passage in the old Ashvale Territorial Charter, he said, which I've been thinking about. What does it say? She said. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. He put the paper in his pocket. Says, she said, that the Lycan King may, in recognition of a person's material and significant contribution to the peace of the Ashvale Highlands, formally petition to enter a bond of partnership. Not of ownership, not of transfer, not pursuant to any prior agreement, but freely offered and freely considered. The corridor was very quiet. I am not asking, he said. I want to be precise about that, making you aware that the option exists. She looked at him. He looked back, the slate after rain eyes. Who would witness it? She said. Whoever you wanted to witness it, he said. It could be no one. Could be Brix and Marsh and Elodie, and the entire kitchen staff. Part is yours. She stood in the doorway of the South Tower room that she had made hers without intending to, and she thought about a girl of 22 who had signed a document without reading it carefully enough. And she thought about Larkspur, and the cold thing in her chest, and the 22 days on the hall bench, and all of the revision that had happened in her since the morning she stood at the altar. She was not that girl. She was 26, and she had stood her ground in a foreign hall for 3 weeks, and she had found the Farron annulment in a library, and she had built a territorial framework from scratch, and she had kept her own name. I would want Marsh and Brix to witness, she said. Calder said nothing for a moment. Not Elodie, he said. Elodie would cry, she said, and then I would feel obligated to cry, and I am not doing that in front of witnesses. He smiled. A real one. The kind that reached the slate after rain eyes and changed them to something warmer and more specific. Ask Brix to send for Marsh, he said. Tell her to come for the signing of the territorial accord, Sarah said. We'll do both at once. I want the accord witnessed first. The accord first, he said. Accord first, she repeated. Everything in the right order. He nodded. He turned to go down the corridor. He paused, with his hand against the stone wall, and turned back. Sarah, he said. She looked at him. The river below the south wall, he said. The one visible from your window. It's called the Velath. It's fordable from late spring through early autumn. In winter it runs fast and cold, and you can hear it from the South Tower on clear nights, if the wind is right. She stood in her doorway. I've been wondering about that river, she said. I know, he said. I saw you looking at the botanical maps. He left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, even and unhurried, the footsteps of a man who had somewhere to be, and was not running to get there. She leaned in the doorframe for a moment and looked back into the room, at the bed and the hearth and the east windows with the highland slope beyond them, and the thread of the Veleth far below, dark silver in the morning light. She had not been sent here. She had not been brought here. She had chosen to stand in a place until it became her own, and now it was, and the work ahead was real work, and the bond ahead, if it came, would be different from every bond she had ever been offered, because it would be hers to offer in return. Not a transfer, not a clause, not Larkspur chosen in a hurry to mean something she needed but couldn't say aloud. She put on her boots and went downstairs to the library, and she spread the territorial maps across the table, and she began to write the final draft of the accord in her own words, the words she had chosen, in her own hand, with her own name at the bottom. Marsh arrived on the 6th day with a fresh seal from her father. His blessing, Marsh said, expressed in the most formal language available to a border steward who was too proud to use the word proud. And they signed the territorial accord at the long table in the main hall with Brix and Marsh as witnesses and Elodie hovering in the doorway, until Calder told her she was welcome to come in, at which point she came in and stood in the corner and was very still, and only somewhat visibly moved. Sarah and Calder signed the second document. It was short. It was in plain language. Every clause was explained. There were no reassignment provisions, no territorial contingencies, no fine print. It said that they entered a partnership of equals, freely and without coercion, and that the terms were theirs together, and that no prior arrangement had any claim on this one. Sarah signed her name, Sarah Bren, and looked at what she had written and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that her name was something she was walking forward into rather than something being spoken without her permission in a room full of witnesses. That the Veleth was audible that night from the South Tower window. She lay in the warm dark and listened to it and let the sound of it fill the room, and she thought about the year ahead. The real negotiation work, the courier routes to the Lowmark, the Highland passes in spring, and none of it frightened her, and all of it was hers.